Hello, distance learners. I hope all of you are doing well and staying healthy. This screencast today is going to go over our essential terminology for our upcoming memoir novel that we are going to be reading, entitled Night by Elie Wiesel, who lived to tell and write about his experience in the Holocaust. It is a short, quick read. However, it's a very powerful read, and there are some definite terms, in particular Jewish terminology, that we need to be familiar with before we start reading. So these terms can all be found in your night study guide. If you want to fill that in simultaneously as I go through the PowerPoint, it might be very helpful to print out that study guide so that it'll be easier to perhaps write the definitions and explanations of these terms. Just a suggestion, but you do what works best for you. Okay, here we go. Jewish holidays. Our main character, Elie, talks about a lot of them. He's very religious. The first one he talks about is called Yom Kippur. Literally translated means Day of Forgiveness, and this is simply a day set aside in the Jewish community where they ask for forgiveness for one's sins. Next is Passover. Passover, what they are celebrating there, and if you take a look at my pictures on these slides, it could be helpful to remember what they are. But Passover is when God was said to pass over the Jews, freeing them from slavery in Egypt centuries ago. So this is the celebration of their freedom. Rosh Hashanah, this is the Jewish New Year. It does not happen on January 1st like we celebrate. I believe it happens in April, maybe? I have to check on that. Okay, next. Selection. This is a process that determined if you were healthy enough to live or too sick and should die. Essentially what this was, in the concentration camps, they had constant shipments coming in from various places in Poland, Czechoslovakia, so they had to constantly make room in the camps. And so they would have what's called selection. So all the prisoners would basically line up, and they would have to run, most times completely nude, in front of a line of Nazi doctors. And they would determine if that particular prisoner looked healthy enough, then they would go to the healthy line. Or if you looked too sickly, then you would go to the selection line, which basically meant your fate was sealed and you would likely be taken to the crematorium or to the gas chambers. A pipel, you'll see the picture there. A pipel is a child assistant to the SS officers. We'll talk about the SS officers. They were simply officers in the camp. And they were trained to be very, very cruel to camp prisoners. You might have heard the phrase before, Hitler Youth. So our character, he's not even a character. This is nonfiction, obviously. But he will talk about pipels that he sees in the camps. Ghettos. These are little cities where the Jews were kept prior to being deported. So you have to remember, World War II is going on, and the Jews were constantly lied to. They were told that the war front was getting closer, but the war was getting close to ending. And so they were told, pack up your belongings. We're just going to temporarily relocate you. You know, the war front is getting closer. Your safety is our concern. Pack up a few things. We're going to relocate you to these ghettos. And when the war's all over, you'll go back to your homes. Well, of course, the Jews at this time had no reason to think anything alarming. And they were completely duped, completely blindsided, and lied to. Anti-Semitism is the extreme hatred of the Jewish. If somebody commits an anti-Semitic act, it's geared specifically toward the Jewish community. A capo. This is a prisoner who was chosen to be leader of their block or their barrack where the prisoner stayed. So in other words, you were kind of like the captain of your little barrack. This was bittersweet. If you were a capo, you might have gotten better treatment in that you might have gotten an extra set of clothing or an extra piece of bread or an extra ration of soup. However, if anyone in your block or your barrack that you were in charge of slipped up or didn't pull their weight with something, the SS were coming to you as the capo for an explanation as to why. A Sonderkommando, Elie will talk about in the book. This is a very horrendous job that some of the inmates were given. This is a unit of work where prisoners were selected to work in the crematoriums, placing corpses into the ovens. A beetle, one of Ellie's main friends that he talks about even before he's deported into the camp, is Moshe the beetle. So a beetle is simply a synagogue helper. He prepares the temple for worship. SS, we talked about this earlier. This is a Nazi officer who worked in the camps, followers of Hitler, trained to be very fierce, very cruel. That is their notorious SS lightning bolt symbol. Gestapo, whereas the SS were strictly the officers within the camp, the Gestapo was the Nazi police force. So there is a difference between Gestapo and SS. Synagogue, as we talked about previously, this is simply like the Jewish church, the Jewish place of worship. Kommando, you're going to hear Ellie talk about this, about how he worked in this commando or that commando. This is simply a unit. For example, Ellie discusses how he was placed in different work units or commandos in each camp. For example, in one of the camps, he's placed in the factory commando, where he separated nuts and bolts and artillery for the war effort. Barracks. This is a place where the camp prisoners were housed. They were jam-packed into these beds. A motif. We talked about this earlier this year. A word or phrase that repeats in a work and it holds significance to the work's theme. So this is important. The key thing here is repeats. Here's an example. The author of Night uses the word night often. Many horrid things happen to him at night, therefore his word becomes a motif. Genocide, we'll talk a little more about this later on, but this is the mass extermination of a race or people. 6 million Jews perished during the Holocaust, but unfortunately genocide is still occurring today as we speak. Truncheon, we're going to get Officer Mengel up to the classroom. Distance learners, hopefully you can zoom in that day to show us what a truncheon looks like. This is basically like a modern day cop's nightstick, but the SS officers would use these. This is a club-like instrument used for prisoner beatings. It is made of solid steel, is very much a weapon, and can very much severely injure or kill a human being. Holocaust, literally translated, means great fire. The Aryan race, Hitler's ideal race for an ideal Germany. He wanted it to be perfect, blonde hair, blue eyes. Jewish text that Ellie's going to talk about. The first one is the Kabbalah. This is the Jewish text filled with the mysteries of the religion. Ellie very much wants to study this and learn about his religion. Sighet. This is now modern-day Romania. This is Ellie's hometown. This is where he was deported from to the ghetto. So you can see Romania. It's modern-day Romania here. And many of the train rides to the camps would take them across Hungary into Poland, Austria. Very long journeys. Auschwitz. This is Ellie's first concentration camp. It is the most notorious death camp known for this Arbeit macht frei. There's my German for you. Meaning work makes one free, which is pretty ironic. Birkenau, this is still Auschwitz, but it's simply the reception center or arrival point, kind of where prisoners would be checked in. Buna, this is Ellie's second camp. He worked in a factory here, as I mentioned earlier, separating nuts and bolts. Gleiwitz, this is the third camp. Ellie arrived here after the 42-mile death march. It was very horrendous. Many people died. And Buchenwald, this is Ellie's final camp. He was liberated from here when army tanks showed up at the gates of Buchenwald in April 1945. And that is a very famous picture there. You can see the gates. By that time, most of the SS officers had fled because they did not want to be captured. They tried to hide what they did. And so the ones that remained were arrested and tried for war crimes. And the ones that didn't remain fled. Okay, that is it. Take some time to fill in your study guide and look for more screencasts and Zoom discussions to come. Hope everyone has a great day.